Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. In this talk, we will discuss the concept of useful knowledge versus useless knowledge. Islamic teaching distinguishes strongly between these two concepts. There is a dua, there is a prayer by the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ that, "O Allah, I seek knowledge that is beneficial," and also a dua in which he seeks protection from Allah from knowledge that is not useful. So obviously these two types of knowledge are very different. We want to have one of them and we want to avoid the other type. But the Western point of view is that there is no such distinction. All knowledge is equal. This is illustrated by many different methods. So if you're studying very abstract mathematics and people ask what's the use of it, it is said that this might become useful later on, we don't know, and many such examples are available. A very classic example is that you can study bats, and it's on the surface it seems like a useless thing to study, how the bats fly around, but it actually led to a very useful production, which was the sonar, which is what they use. The bats use sound. The bats are blind. They use sound and they bounce it off the surroundings to get an idea of where they are. So studying something useless can later turn to be useful. So this is the justification, and many other justifications are given for the failure to distinguish between useful and useless, because at this time we don't know. That is the argument. So the question is, the puzzle that we are trying to solve in this particular lecture, why is there such a big difference between the Western and the Islamic conceptions? Why does the West deny the distinction? And we will see that this is related to the questions of what does knowledge mean, and also what is the meaning of life and what is the purpose of life. But for the moment I would like to talk about what have been the effects of this denial in Western education. And I would like to say that failing to make the distinction between useful and useless knowledge has led to the inclusion of a huge amount of useless and harmful knowledge on the Western syllabus. Especially if you look at economic theory, there is a huge amount of theory which has no relation to reality, and it is of no value in understanding the world. It is actually quite harmful in that students who learn economic theories about how the world works are blinded to the realities. The obvious example is the global financial crisis, where professional economists were completely blind to the forces that created the crisis. This harmful theory is actually routinely taught to students for years on years in very complex courses, and they absorb this poison. I would like to just illustrate that my point of view is shared by a large number of people, including leading economists. So here are some quotes. Mark Blau says that modern economics is sick. It is just an intellectual game played for its own sake and not for practical consequences. Famous economist Joan Robinson said that we study economics not to learn how the world works, but to avoid being deceived by economists. Ronald Coase, who's a very well-respected economist, says that existing economics is a theoretical system which floats in the air and has no relation to what happens in the real world. Julie Nelson said that economics actually poisons our minds and it makes us be immoral, because basically economics teaches that selfishness and not caring for others is rational behavior, and this is actually what happens. People actually go out and do things which get them personal benefits at huge social costs. This is actually one of the drivers of the environmental collapse that we see around us. In contrast, I would like to now describe the Islamic attitude and approach towards knowledge. So the first thing is that Islamic teachings emphasize the value of knowledge. In the first revelation to the Prophet, Allah Ta'ala, God, introduced himself as the one who gives knowledge to man of that which the man does not know. So actually the knowledge of Islam, which was given to ignorant and backwards Arabs in the desert, transformed them into world leaders, and it created a civilization that dominated the world and enlightened the world for 1,000 years. So the knowledge that was given to the ignorant Arabs was obviously of great value. Islamic teachings mention and emphasize the virtue of seeking knowledge, and these teachings created the thirst for knowledge in the hearts of the Muslims. And if you look at history, why is it, you ask the question, why is it that Muslims became leaders of the world? You find the answer does not lie in any new technology or economy or any other material thing. It was rather the search for knowledge, the thirst for knowledge that was created in the hearts of the Muslims by the teachings of Islam that led them to become world leaders and led them to seek knowledge from all corners of the world. So what exactly is useful knowledge? How do we tell what is useful knowledge and what is useless? So I would like to offer a definition which is based on Islamic teachings, and basically useful knowledge teaches us how to live, how to make the best use of our unique and precious lives. Every moment of our life is precious. It cannot be replicated, it cannot be purchased. Time is passing by, and when it is gone, it will be gone. All the treasure in the world will not be able to purchase it. So the question of how we can use these lives in the most valuable way, this is the most important question that all of us face. But this requires learning more about who we are, what we are meant to be, what we can be. What is the hidden potential which lies inside of us, which can be developed? All human beings are born with enormous potential, and useful knowledge is what develops this potential inside us and which teaches us how to live our lives to the fullest. In contrast, harmful knowledge fools us, deceives us into making the wrong efforts. It sets up the wrong goals and makes us waste our lives in the pursuit of things which are not important and not relevant. And many people at the end of their lives have regrets that, I spent too much time in my career, I spent too much time chasing money, and I missed out the most important things that life has to offer. So these are the harmful knowledge is that which leads us to waste our lives in wrong pursuits. So in order to find out whether knowledge is useful or not, we must then determine the purpose of life. We must know what is the goal in order to find out if we are going towards it or if we are being distracted away from it. So without knowing the purpose of life, we cannot tell if some kind of knowledge is useful or useless. So that explains the puzzle that we started this lecture with. In the West, the dominant ideology is modern and secular. And according to this dominant ideology, life is meaningless. Universe was created by an accident, and a life itself has no purpose. If life has no purpose, then whatever I do is equally meaningful, whether I choose to educate myself or whether I remain ignorant, whether I have knowledge or whether I lack it. This is it's all the same because life has no meaning. So at the very beginning, it would be necessary to debate, discuss, think about, is it true that life is meaningless or is it meaningful? There are these two positions, and both have been taken and defended by philosophers over the centuries. Existentialism, for example, is a philosophy which says that life is meaningless to begin with, but we can create meaning. And many other thinkers say no, that life is meaningful to begin with. So the point is that we cannot pass by this question in silence. We must discuss this question. Now, in the Western education, this question is never discussed, and therefore an answer is given without actual discussion, and the answer is that this question doesn't is not important, which basically reduces to the modern secular point of view that life is meaningless. So the question is, how can we determine purpose? How can we? This is one of the harmful effects of a Western education, that it makes you forget about the purpose of life by teaching you all sorts of things, by teaching you about quadratic equations and flowers and boiling point of water and so many different things, and never talking about meaning of life. The impression is created that all of those things are important, but meaning of life is not important. But this is actually a great deception, and it's very harmful for us, because the meaning of life is the most important question that we face in our personal lives. So for Muslims, the answer is very easy. If you start by believing in the God and the Prophet and the message, then the Quran itself answers this question. It says that the purpose of life is to please Allah by doing the best of deeds and to strive for success on the day of judgment. And this is to, what are the best of deeds? It's to have the most excellent conduct patterned on the manner of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But for those who are not Muslims, this still, the question of purpose is still the most important question of their lives. We have to ask, was this universe created by accident? There are arguments both for and against. There is a very strong argument that this universe was actually created. You should listen to both sides of this argument and try to decide who is right, because this is very important. And explore the different arguments and see which appeals to your heart. In the search for meaning, one very important lesson from my own experience is this prayer of Ibrahim alayhi salam, which is written in the Quran. And it says that Ibrahim alayhi salam was himself searching for guidance. He did not know who God was. So he looked at the stars and the sun, and he looked at the moon, the bright moon, and he said, oh, this is my God. But then when it set, he said, no, this cannot be my God. And then he came to the prayer that unless my Lord guides me, and at this point he doesn't know who God is or even whether he exists. So if my God does not guide me, then I will surely go astray. In my own life experience, I also made this prayer, and there's a link on this page which will lead you to that. My experience. Even more interesting experience is that of Dr. Lawrence Brown. I have linked the video here, and you should watch that from at least 6 minutes of that or 5 minutes of that. It will give you his experience about how in a time of distress he appealed to God even though he did not know whether God existed, and when God answered his prayer, then he set out on the search for God, and he came to Islam. So this is basically what we are all required to do. We are required to search for gods, and currently, according to Islamic views, we all have multiple gods, because even though we may not acknowledge it, we live our lives according to different purposes, different goals. We have to have goals, because whenever we choose an action, we choose it to please somebody, to achieve some goal. And these, according to Islam, are our gods. And what Islam teaches us is that all of these purposes that we set for ourselves, whether it's fame or whether it's wealth or whether it's popularity, whether it's women, whether it's pleasure, none of these will satisfy us in the end. So they will all deceive us. They are all false gods. So the true religion involves rejecting all of these false gods, that is, these false goals of life, and coming to the unique goal of pleasing the creator of the whole world, and actually focusing on this to the exclusion of everything else. Focus on pleasing Allah even if the whole world is displeased. So this is the purpose according to Islam. And for those who do not have this purpose, do not have this blessing, this gift of Islam, their job is to search for the purpose of life and to search for whether or not God exists, and to put their most serious effort into the search for the meaning of life, because if they miss it, they miss the whole value of life itself. So this last page provides links to related material about this question. This lecture, this particular topic is an initial segment of lecture 8 in a course on Islamic economics that I am currently teaching, and there are links to the course website and to the other lectures, and in fact to the remaining portion of this lecture as well. So let us make prayer to Allah that He will lead us all to guidance. This is one of the central prayers of Islam.